We had a cold start to the year with a heavy frost on New Year's Day. It was a real wintry scene. Even the spiders had cold feet. No sooner had the year started than we went into another COVID lockdown. The hospitality industry closed down again, and non-essential shops and services were all closed again. Winter is always a bad time for animal deaths on the forest roads, and this year was no exception. The New Forest Park Authority put up new signage to highlight the need to take care. Many of the commoners who own the ponies put reflective collars on their animals. But the main message from my friend here is this. We had one named storm in January, Storm Christoph. Although we had a lot of rain, the New Forest got off very lightly compared to other parts of the country. This pig enjoyed the mud though. Since we've been locked in for large parts of the last year, many of us have been ordering more stuff online. Amazon's very pleased. When you walk through the forest, you might come across trees that look like this. These are marked to be felled. Pine trees grown in the forest are not native species and are grown as a crop. These are felled when they're mature, though some are usually left to grow on. The cleared area will normally self-seed with native species or be replanted. The wood is mainly used in the construction industry and to make paper. These days, a lot of that paper is recycled into cardboard. Those boxes that are being delivered to you with your online orders have got to come from somewhere. At the end of January and early February, the weather was quite warm. Some of the birds thought spring had arrived and started to sing. Here's a couple of favourites that you might hear in your own garden. Towards the middle of February, the cold weather returned. The birds realised that spring hadn't quite arrived yet and stopped singing. The New Forest again escaped the worst of the snow, but the temperature did still fall to -6 at one point, which is plenty cold enough. Food was in short supply for the ponies. Some of them eat the prickly holly leaves. They seem to manage to chew it up okay. Brook Hill Vineyard is owned and run by Ian and Amanda Brown. Their grapes are hand-picked, crushed and fermented in their own winery to make a range of award-winning still and sparkling wines. It's mid-February now and the vines, over 2,500 of them, need to be pruned. The grapes grow on this year's growth, so much of the previous year's growth has to be removed. Here we see Ian starting the pruning. This style of pruning is known as double guillot. 2 of last year's shoots are retained, and these are trained along horizontal wires. This year's shoots will grow from these. And here we see a before and after. We'll be back next time in April to see if the buds have burst yet. In the winter, we can see where the birds nested last summer. When they built their nests, of course, the leaves hid them from predators. We can see the lichens that grow on some of the branches. And the ferns growing in the moss on the trunks of some of the trees. The wildlife is often easier to spot too in the winter. Here's a fallow deer. And here's one of my favourite birds. This is the goldcrest, Britain's smallest bird. You can often see them flitting around on the dead bracken in the undergrowth. This isn't me holding the goldcrest here. This is a stock photo which I've included to show you the goldcrest size. They're tiny. Towards the end of February, signs that spring was really just around the corner began to appear everywhere. Let's hope that March doesn't let us down. March the 1st is St David's Day, and the daffodil is the Welsh national flower. This year the daffodils were all out in flower to celebrate the day. Also on March the 1st, I heard this. Was it one of these? Or one of these? And where is their new nest? The hedges are cut in the winter months, and the beginning of March is the last time that they can be cut before the birds start nesting. Here's the before. And here's the after. Very smart. Farther along the lane, I saw this. Can you see what's behind the hedge? He was very still, waiting for some poor unsuspecting rodent to walk by. March was a very quiet month weather-wise, though we did have one storm in the middle of the month. Spring wouldn't be spring without the birds singing. Here's an extract. The song thrush is singing from the top of this tree. I think he's singing today to celebrate one of his chicks hatching out. These are robin's eggs. The nest is inside a hose pipe on a garage wall. My friend Charlie won't be able to water his garden for a few weeks. If you're walking your dogs in the forest, make sure that you keep them under control at all times. This is especially true at this time of year if you're walking in an area where the rare ground nesting birds are breeding. The lovely yellow flowers of the gorse is a sure sign that spring is on the way. This year, the spring flowers seem to be a bit later than usual, but they seem to last longer. Or maybe it's my imagination. April is the month when the fallow deer start to shed their antlers. These images were taken in early April, and these boys weren't showing any sign of shedding their antlers yet. Roe deer shed their antlers in the autumn, and their new ones have grown by the spring. Bah! These sheep are out on the forest now that the grass has started growing again. The ponies are enjoying the April sunshine. Although April was mainly sunny and dry, it was cold at night, with frosts on some nights. The 12th of April was a momentous day in the COVID roadmap back to normality. The pubs were allowed to reopen, serving outdoors only, and going to the pub meant wrapping up warm. Non-essential shops also reopened. So too did the hairdressers, who were all booked up for weeks in advance. It's mid-April, and we're back to see Ian and Amanda at Brook Hill Vineyard. When we were last here in February, you might remember that Ian was pruning the vines, leaving 2 of last year's shoots on which this year's shoots will grow. These shoots have now been laid along the horizontal wires. The new buds are just beginning to show, but we've had some very heavy frosts in April, which will damage the opening buds and young shoots. Hopefully, The buds won't burst open until the threat of the frost is gone. Inside the winery, there's a lot of empty bottles waiting to be filled. Ian and Amanda are bottling the Brook Hill 2020 white wine vintage. The wine is pumped from this stainless steel tank along the plastic pipe and through a final sterile filtration unit, which removes any remaining particulates from the wine. The wine, which is a blend of 50% Bacchus grapes, 25% Ortega grapes and 25% Chardonnay, flows into the reservoir from which 4 bottles can be filled at the same time. The full bottles are checked to make sure that they contain the required 750 ml of wine before the bottle caps are applied. Here are the filled bottles, which now just need the labels to be applied and they're ready for sale. There's plenty more to fill before the day's work is done and all 1100 bottles are filled. This bottle has escaped. Cheers! As we moved towards the end of April, the leaves started appearing on the trees. This crow was doing its best to eat as many buds as possible before they opened. The bluebells started to flower. And the spring lambs gambolled around in the fields. Following a cold and dry April, May was cold and wet. We had April showers in May, and some of these seemed to be on steroids. The new forest became a rainforest. Sheltering under a tree didn't stop you getting soaked. At least this woodpecker appreciated the soft ground. But we also had some lovely bright days too. Some mornings, the old bracken in the forest seemed to be smouldering as the rainwater evaporated when the sun came up. May is the time of year when selected new forest stallions are let out onto the forest for a few weeks to lay the groundwork for next year's foals. This is very tightly controlled, and the best stallions are released in different parts of the forest. 20 in total this year. This is Mogshade Quarryman. And this is Bull Hill Major. He's only been out for a few days, but he's already attracted a large crowd of admirers. We'll look forward to seeing the results of all their hard work next May. It's a hard job for a stallion, but somebody's got to do it. This foal is a result of last year's stallion release. He's still very shaky on his legs. The donkeys too have their foals at this time of year. And the deer fawns appear too. These are fallow deer. I couldn't resist showing you these little piglets causing a minor traffic jam. And the birds have their young now as well, of course. On the 17th of May, more COVID restrictions were lifted. This included pubs and hotels being allowed to open indoors. No need to sit in the pub garden with a coat on anymore. The third week of May was English Tourism Week. The New Forest was open for business, and much of the available accommodation had already been booked up. At the end of May, summer suddenly appeared, as if the weather had flicked a switch. Much appreciated by this pony. Dogstaval was held in early June. This is a dog festival with all sorts of events and shenanigans for dogs and their owners. This becomes more and more popular every year. It's May now, back at Brook Hill Vineyard with Ian and Amanda. The cold weather continued into May, with late frost still a big threat. This delayed the vine's growth, as we can see with this comparison of this year's growth with the same time last year. As we moved into June, the weather was much warmer and the vines really started to grow. There are far too many shoots on the vines now, and the weaker shoots need to be taken off. This is known as bud rubbing. The more vigorous shoots are left on the vines, spaced out. This ensures that most of the energy in the vines goes towards the development of the grapes, not the extra shoots. This also improves the quality and quantity of the yield, as we shall see later in the year. Buds are also left on the vines to provide next year's new growth. Here we can see the before and after view. The vines are budding now, and next time we'll see them in flower. Here's Mabel and Petra admiring the hard work that's going on around them. Towards the end of June, Brook Hill Vineyard celebrated English Wine Week with a silver medal from the 2021 Wine GB Awards. Well done, Ian and Amanda. At this time of year, the rhododendrons are in full bloom. The flowers really are spectacular. We shouldn't forget, though, that the rhododendron is not native to this country. The bushes will grow to many times the height of a person, allowing very little light to get through its thick leaf canopy. Rhododendrons will outcompete most native plants, causing them to die out. It should really be contained in areas such as the Ornamental Drive near Brockenhurst, where it can be kept under control. Although June wasn't particularly cold, it was another wet month. The ford at Brockenhurst was running over the road, which is not what you expect in June. What else happened in June? Oh yes, England's football team beat Germany 2-0 in Euro 2020, the first time that we've beaten the Germans in a knockout tournament since 1966. Not strictly a New Forest activity, but something for us to celebrate nonetheless. July began as June left off, with cool days and showers on more days than not. The stallions that were let out in May were due to be taken off the forest in early July. Suzanne Kemp, the owner of Bull Hill Major, who we saw earlier, contacted me to let me know when and where she would be collecting her stallion. Here he is, having a good scratch against the War Memorial at Bolton's Bench, outside of Lyndhurst. He's travelled about 4 miles from where he was released in May, and during the last 8 weeks he's spent time with at least 3 groups of mares. He's been quite busy. Suzanne said that he'd be easy to catch, and he was.
Yes. But we've had the mares laying and trotting after the trailer.
He followed his feed bowl up into the trailer. His mares weren't too pleased to see him go though, and became quite agitated. He goes off in his trailer, leaving his mares still very frisky. calm is restored. Bull Hill who? And here he is, back home with one of his mares, and one of his many sons. July the 15th is St Swithin's Day. Legend has it that the weather on St Swithin's Day will last for another 40 days, whether that's wet or dry. There is actually a meteorological justification for this, which I've included in the text below. Well, St Swithin's Day this year was a lovely summer's day. No rain and not too hot. 2 days later, we had a heat wave which lasted about 5 days. The farmers were all very busy getting as much hay made as they could while the weather was dry. It was very hot, and these ponies weren't in a hurry to move out of the shade. And these butterflies made the most of the sun. The heat wave didn't last, and we were soon back to the usual, sunny periods and showers. St Swithin let us down this year. Back in April, I showed you this picture of a roebuck molting his winter coat. He looked a bit moth-eaten. Here he is with his beautiful russet red summer coat. Very handsome. Similarly, we saw these fallow deer bucks in June growing their new antlers, which were covered in a velvet skin back then. In August they looked like this, all ready for the rutting season. Back at Brook Hill Vineyard in early July, the vines are flowering. Not the most dramatic flowers you'll ever see. The vines are self-pollinating, so they don't need to waste energy producing bright-coloured flowers to attract insects. If you visit a vineyard anywhere in the world, you'll usually see roses at the end of the rows of vines. Whilst they brighten up the vineyard, they also serve a useful purpose. The roses are prone to disease, so if the roses show signs of mildew, for example, it's a sign that the vines need to be sprayed. Ian's recently sprayed the vines here with a sulphur spray to protect against mildew. In practice, if the roses have mildew, the vines probably already have it too. So the roses are really an assurance. If the roses are healthy, the vines will be healthy too. Here's a vine with downy mildew. You can see the rust-coloured spots on the leaves. In late July, the bunches of grapes are growing bigger. The vine leaves around the grapes need to be taken off to allow the sun to shine on the grapes. Once the leaves have been removed, you can see how the grapes have grown. Now we're in late August, and the bunches of grapes are really progressing. Due to the cool weather this year, the grapes are about 4 weeks behind where they'd usually be at this time, so the harvest won't begin until the end of September, unless the weather warms up. We'll come back then and help with the harvest. In late July, the heather is in flower, and the open areas of the forest are a sea of purple and red. Local beekeepers take advantage of this and move their beehives out onto the forest so that the bees can make heather honey, which is very popular. Once the bird nesting season was over, the forestry resumed their tree felling programme. That includes you, Edith. No messing about with chainsaws. This is a proper forestry boy's toy. The machine clamps onto the base of the tree and cuts through the trunk. It then guides the tree down to the ground, causing the minimum of damage. The trunk is sawn up into predefined lengths. The lengths are defined by the sawmill which has bought the wood. The lengths of timber are then left in piles around the wood. The collecting truck picks up the lengths of wood and takes them to the side of the nearby track. The logs are later collected by lorries from the sawmill and taken away. These will mainly be used in the building industry and for fence posts. Sadly, the New Forest show was cancelled for the second year running due to COVID. Hopefully it will be back in August 2022. The forest campsites were open this year though, and they were busy, as were the local pubs and restaurants. As August progressed, the foals were growing. Some early fungi appeared. Towards the end of August, the showers finally stopped and we had some dry weather. Though not particularly warm. At least the forest dried out. Although we haven't had a glorious summer this year, the rains kept the grass growing and the ponies all look in great condition. September began with a short heat wave and the forest was very dry, which made a change from most of the summer. On autumn mornings, it's quite common to see webs on the gorse bushes. These are made by gorse spider mites, who feed on the gorse. It's not so common to see the gorse bushes covered in webs. Looks like Halloween's come early here. In the middle of September, about 600 pigs are usually let out onto the forest for about 2 months to eat the acorns, which are poisonous to the ponies if they eat too many. Last year there was a massive crop of acorns. This year there aren't so many, and only about 120 pigs were released this time. During September, a false rumour started that petrol stations were running out of fuel. Panic buying lasted about 3 weeks, ensuring that the rumour came true and petrol stations did indeed run out of fuel. The jokes on social media gave us a laugh though. Dwarf sunflowers became a thing this year. I haven't seen these before. They're very attractive. The autumn is the time of the rut for the fallow and red deer that live in the forest. Males fight with each other to defend their territories and their female harem. Here's a magnificent fallow buck caught on camera by Annette Gregory. At the end of September, autumn arrived with a bump. We had a lot of rain. Towards the end of September, the grapes at Brookhill Vineyard were ready to be harvested. Ian has an app on his phone which gives him a very specific weather forecast for the vineyard, so he can plan ahead the best days for picking. We'll be picking Pinot Gris today. We'll also see the Chardonnay grapes being pressed. Here's Amanda picking some of the Pinot Gris grapes. She has to discard any grapes which show signs of rot. This is very labour intensive and several people are involved with the picking. Here's the first load of Pinot Gris grapes on its way to being pressed. We've jumped ahead to the following day now, when the Chardonnay grapes are ready to be pressed. First they're weighed and then destemmed. The stems come out at one end, the grape skins and juice flow along a pipe to the grape press. It's rather dark inside the press, but I'm sure you get the idea. This is now called grape must. The grape must is compressed in the press and grape juice collects below. The juice is then transferred to one of the stainless steel tanks, where fermentation will take place. It's a busy time of year in the vineyard. The second week of October was warm and dry. Patricia Merkin found this grass snake enjoying the sun's warmth in her garden. These chickens enjoyed the sun too, with the cockerel keeping his beady eye on things. This red admiral made the most of the blackberries before looking for a place to hibernate. The berries on the bushes are part of nature's larder, of course. Blackberries, with apple, make a delicious crumble, and 10 blackberries count towards your 5 a day. Hips are used to make rose hip syrup, which contains various vitamins and relieves the symptoms of arthritis. Haws are used to make a jelly, a tasty accompaniment to eat with cheese. Sloes are used to make sloe gin. Say no more. These are elderberries. The elder flowers make a very popular cordial drink. Elderberries are packed with antioxidants and vitamins that may boost your immune system. They may also counter the effects of too much sloe gin. The popular New Forest Walking Festival was back in October, and this year it was extended to include cycling. Organised guided events were held on most days, led by knowledgeable experts. Many of these were sold out in advance. I didn't see many fungi during September, but made up for that in October. This lovely image was taken by Annette Meeson. I almost expected to see a fairy flying by. By late October, autumn had definitely arrived. I thought I'd be ending this month by showing you the autumn leaves, but they're late this year, so we'll leave that until next month. As we moved into November, the red deer rut was still going on. These lovely pictures, taken by Annette Gregory, show a magnificent stag with his harem, and defending them against an interloper. By the end of November, the rut was over, and the stags were all friends again. In the summer, we saw this roe deer with its bright summer coat. Now we see a roe deer in his winter coat. These images are poor quality as I took them on my phone camera, but you can see how well he blends in with his surroundings. Late fungi were still appearing in the forest in November. There seemed to be a bumper crop of hollyberries this year. The old wives' tale says that this is a sign of a hard winter to come. It's been a very mild winter so far. Come back next time to see how we fared in January and February. At the beginning of the year, we saw the pine trees being felled in this area of the forest. Now, the ground's being cleared with the tree roots grubbed up and burned. We'll come back next year to see if any new trees have been planted. November the 13th was Remembrance Sunday. This year was the 100th anniversary of the formation of the British Legion, and parades were held across the New Forest and the rest of the country. These were very well attended. Sadly, there aren't too many World War II soldiers left to honour their fallen comrades. The autumn leaves were late this year, and it was well into November before they were at their best. These images from Anne Hall really highlight the beauty of autumn in the forest. Towards the end of the month, the leaves were all falling, covering the forest floor. There's a path here somewhere. After a very wet end to October, November and December were both mainly dry and mild. We had some of these, and some of these. We also had a few frosty mornings. At the end of November and early December, we had a couple of named storms. We got off pretty lightly in the New Forest, but the wind was still enough to bring down a few trees. Many of the days were like this. Listen. Peace. It's winter now at Brook Hill Vineyard. The winemaking process, or vinification, begins after the harvest. The grape juice that was produced from the crushing of the grapes is pumped into stainless steel tanks and allowed to settle. It's then pumped into another tank to remove the sediment. Yeast and sugar, if it's needed, are added and the fermentation begins. This will take between 1 and 6 weeks, depending on the weather and the yeast strain. The tanks are sealed to keep out oxygen, which could affect the fruit flavours of the wines. After a period of weeks or months, the wine is pumped into a clean tank, leaving the sediment or lees behind. A fine clay called bentonite is then added to precipitate out any proteins, which can cause a haze in the wine. The wines are then ready to be blended to make the finished wine ready for bottling. We saw this earlier in the year. And so we've arrived at the end of our year at Brook Hill. During the year we've seen the vines being pruned, the grapes growing, and the harvest, and lots more besides. If you'd like to find out more about Brook Hill's award-winning range of table wines and sparkling wines, you can get in touch with Ian and Amanda at info@brookhillvineyard.co.uk. They'll be delighted to help you. On the Sunday before Christmas, Romsey Young Farmers held a fundraising rally for the air ambulance. Farmers from across the county drove their tractors in convoy around the area. A staggering 203 tractors took part. This is a speeded up view of some of the tractors assembling before the convoy set off. Thanks to Alex Drake for allowing me to use this clip. What a fantastic effort for a great cause. December wouldn't be December these days without seeing our houses lit up with Christmas lights. But if you want to see a real display, that's probably visible from the International Space Station, you need to go to Byron Road in Barton-on-Sea. This fantastic display along the road is organised every year. If you go to see it next year, don't forget to put a donation in the charity box. We'll end this year with a couple of festive images. If you've been kissing anyone under the mistletoe this year, I hope you ask them if they'd taken a lateral flow test first. And here's everyone's winter friend, the robin. Thanks for watching, and if you've enjoyed the video, please think about subscribing to our channel.